Hey everybody, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining to watch this live if you can. Later, if you're not available live, I get that. Had some time off and decided I would do one of these after watching a couple of new Tom Rabbittt videos featuring everybody's favorite foaming at the mouth Christian troll, Darth Dawkins. I'm going to jump right into this one because it's kind of long. I've got it sped up just a little bit to 1.25. If anybody's got an issue with the way that plays back, just let me know if it's going too fast or anything like that. You'd like me to slow it down to normal. Normally 1.25 is not too bad. This one's about 25 minutes long, so I kind of want to get through it. Darth does a lot of what he would call filibustering in this. So it takes him a while to get to his point. So I'm going to get started. Here we go.
Okay, so if you say, I do not believe that the facts that you do believe in derive and depend upon God, then consequently your position by default will be that facts are independent of God, whether you admit it or not.
If you say so.
No, you see, that's another sleazy, deceptive response.
It's a border response.
No, it's a sleazy response because either you accept the analysis or you reject it.
Okay, fine, I rejected them.
Good. What's your rebuttal? What third realm? What third metaphysical realm could there possibly be?
My rebuttal is that's not a. Yeah.
What was the question that I just asked you?
You asked what is the third metaphysical something?
Yeah. What's the third metaphysical realm?
Okay. The way of framing this, yeah. The way of framing this is problematic because
no, there's nothing wrong with the question. You want to
is.
deny the facts that you believe in, that they neither reside in dependence upon God, nor do they reside in independence of God. So what is the metaphysical realm that they exist in then? That is the third option.
Okay, so I accept that this dichotomy that you present, that we're in a God world or in a not God world. I accept that that dichotomy. Here's the thing. As far as I'm concerned, to my knowledge, as far as I know or are aware of or believe, we could be in one or the other. I have no way to conclusively verify.
You're not addressing the question. What you're doing is you are just simply reforming. Listen to me. That's not the issue. The issue is you are simply not addressing the question. You are talking around it, and that's another sleazy response. Whenever somebody prevaricates and their interlocutor says you're not addressing the question, rather than to admit that you're prevaricating, then you pull sleaze maneuver number 2 by saying, "Oh, you just don't like what you're hearing," because that's exactly what you did.
You don't.
Now, do you believe in that there are actual facts?
Yes.
Okay. Do you positively believe that those facts are encompassed in the metaphysical realm of dependence upon God? Do you positively believe that?
No.
Right. So then that means then that the only realm in which they could exist in as actualities is in independence from God.
Unless, of course, they exist in independence of God, and I'm wrong.
They could be dependent on something else, but this is a problem. Like I think even Darth has kind of lost track of his own question, right? Because one of the things that he usually asks somebody, right off the gate, what is it? It depends on who he's approaching to, but like one of them is to ask them what is fundamental in their worldview, right? He essentially begins to define the God that he believes in without saying that it's his God. Lists properties like the source of all possibility, impossibility, the ultimate foundation for everything that we can know, basically the creator of absolutely everything, and actually his words, creator and sustainer of absolutely everything, and then wants to know what the atheists thing is, like label that thing in your worldview, which is essentially all he's doing is he's just asking what is God in your worldview, and it's a way to smuggle his worldview into the other person, so he doesn't really have to. He can basically bounce back and forth between an internal external critique, and I think he believes he doesn't have to be held accountable for either technique that he's trying, but by doing that, it doesn't, neither one work. In this case, like he's asking something about like how a person grounds facts. If that person doesn't have an ultimate foundation, a God per se, if they believe in a metaphysical realm that grounds things like what you would call ontological, what makes things ontologically necessary or something like that, it could be that there's something foundational there, but it wouldn't have all the characteristics and properties of the God that Darth usually tries to plow in at the beginning of that other question. I don't know if before this recording, maybe he asked this Ninclow guy that beforehand, who knows? But this seems to be one of those things where this is one of those kind of long-winded ones where Darth is railing against somebody who is attempting to defend a kind of what's kind of been called a lacktheist position. I don't think there's anything wrong with a lacktheist position per se, as long as somebody realizes that it's a psychological disposition. Darth, I think, has been doing a little bit of viewing on things like this because he actually starts using, he uses a weird term for it, but he actually gets into that with Ninclow a little bit later in this. That's part of the reason why I'm playing this.
No, sir, listen to me. You refuse to believe that the facts that you do believe in exist in dependence upon God. So then that means that the facts that you do believe in are within the realm of independence of God.
Right. I don't believe that I don't believe that the facts I'm acquainted with exist in reference to God. Insofar that my beliefs don't dictate reality, that doesn't really matter.
Are your facts, are they surrounded by dependence upon God or independence of God?
No idea. It could be either or.
No, you're not understanding. Then you don't have facts.
No, of course I do.
You're not understanding. Listen to me. Then you don't have facts.
You wouldn't have facts in Darth Dawkins' worldview, but as per his technique, usually he's not asking. This is what's gotten super frustrating about this. He doesn't actually like kind of sit back and ask a skeptic to lay out some kind of explanation for how they would justify things like facts. Like, why describe how you think ontology works or epistemology, or do something like that, and then try to pick it apart from within that framework. Like, where does it fall apart? Where does it seem incoherent based on what they've explained to you? He just automatically assumes like, no. My worldview, because remember, this has been the case now for a little while now. He's actually admitted this, that there is only one worldview, and that's the Christian worldview. And paraphrasing him, all other worldviews don't exist and are incoherent. Just hilarious. Love that statement from him. Never going to let him forget it. But if you're going to insist that they accept your definition of facts, but then not accept any criticism of it, what he's doing is he's blocking an internal critique of his own worldview, and then basically installing all of his stuff into the other person's worldview, asserting that it's the only way. And then when this person doesn't jive with it and doesn't get it and ask questions and starts to push back on it, that person's obviously pushing against what he asserts is established truth. Right? This is how facts work. If you don't believe that facts work the way Darth does, then you can't possibly believe in facts. It's a pretty bold statement, but that's Darth for you.
It's like saying that you don't have a car if you don't.
No, sir. Listen carefully. Listen carefully. Are facts metaphysically and context specific?
Yes.
Okay. The metaphysical context can only exist in one of two realms, either independence of God or independence of God. You categorically refuse to believe that they are within the metaphysical realm of dependence upon God. That means that as long as you believe in facts, then the only realm that you're left with is in independence of God. If you tell me you believe neither, then you don't have facts at all. You actually believe that facts exist with independence of God until shown otherwise. But because what was that, parakeet?
My mistake. Sorry.
Okay. No, I know, and everyone else in this room knows that you believe that facts exist independently of God, but you don't want to admit it verbally on microphone because then it'll be incumbent upon you to defend it. So you engage in verbal deception, trying to promote lacktheism.
Verbal deception, the worst of deceptions, right? I wish Ninclow would just commit this kind of deception to writing. That way, moral and intellectual giants like Darth Dawkins could pick it apart line by line. Again, he's just kind of harping on this whole thing, saying that, if you don't believe that facts are dependent on God, then facts are just basically hanging out there naked in the breeze, subject to the whims of chaos or something. Again, I don't think that he's established anything other than that this idea is to establish that your opponent, who is the skeptic, has a worldview that's automatically deficient from the Christian worldview from the jump, and not give them a moment to ever do anything to explain how they might view facts, how they would support them, what their metaphysical viewpoint is on things, and maybe weigh the internal consistency of that skeptic's worldview with the internal consistency of Darth's worldview. Because as things go on, I will be pointing out some, and like I try to, as best I can, try to point out what I think is inconsistent about Darth's worldview.
In different vernacular, you refuse, you do not believe facts are dependent upon God. So that means that you believe that they're independent of God. Okay.
I mean, this guy's pro-choice. I mean, come on, this guy, it's ridiculous.
No, this is the little verbal.
How does that serve anything in this discussion? These guys are having a fairly cockeyed and goofy explanation about Darth's pretend understanding of metaphysics, and this guy's like, oh, come on, he's pro-choice. So that just disqualifies people. Like, it's interesting to know that these kinds of fallacies are perfectly acceptable within Christian debate circles, right? You can just do a genetic fallacy. Oh, this person believes this one thing, therefore got to be wrong about everything else, right? It only follows that that's the case. Like, oh, they voted for Biden. I bet they can't even write their name, right? I mean, it just follows that they can't do anything right because they didn't vote for the person I wanted them to vote for. Like, this is just childishness, you know, sort of shored up by a goofy, kind of weird, fringy cult at this point. This doesn't strike me as actual Christianity. I'm probably going to do a video on that a little bit later, because I don't think a lot of these guys, I wonder what these guys do, if any of these guys are attending churches on a regular basis, what they're like in that church versus what they're like here. My suspicion is for somebody like Darth Dawkins, he's not going to church. Could be wrong. That might not be it at all.
Game that he has been playing for several years now, because he, as well as other atheists, know they cannot defend the falsity of God. So rather than admit that their belief that there is no God is not rationally derived, they want to transform atheism not as a propositional position that God does not exist, but that merely it's a psychological condition. Hey, Ninclow, have you read the introductory paragraph from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on Atheism? Have you read that?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yes.
Good. And do you have a rebuttal to what they said?
Yeah, it's not applicable because that's not what I refer to when I say atheism.
Okay, yeah, you know what? You are a hopelessly deceptive individual. It is applicable because you're not taking a position at all. Okay? Now, when you claim to withhold judgment from God, that's false, because you are not withholding judgment of God because you have decided that God is not necessary to be invoked.
This is where things, he starts talking pretty quickly here, and he starts kind of jumping around on things. He's already dropped a phrase that he's going to revisit a couple of times, and that is the notion of not believing God as a psychological condition. Per Darth's usual tendencies, the way he uses that is not clear, right? I don't know if he thinks that when he refers to a psychological condition, he's talking about something like, say a bipolar disorder or something, a personality disorder or some kind of thing like that, like a diagnosable condition. Or if he's talking, I think what he's intending to say here is a psychological disposition towards something, which is consistent with lacktheism, right? Lacktheism, for lack of a better word, it might be is just the psychological, epistemological stance of not being inclined to believe that there are gods, right? That's your psychological inclination or disposition towards that idea. You're not convinced that they're real. You're not inclined to think that they're real. That's very different than asserting that you think gods are ontologically, or in a philosophical. So you're going to get into a metaphysical debate and make the argument that that gods aren't real, or that particular gods aren't real, or a God as defined as X is not real, right? That's a very different stance, and people can have both, right? There are people that I think, and I think probably many of them would be, who have a psychological disposition to not believe in gods, but might be more inclined to agree with metaphysical arguments that are closer to the kind that Darth is trying to roll out, right? they might be kind of sympathetic to the view. They might even be inclined to think intellectually, well, you know what, I kind of think that that he might be onto something there. And I'm more inclined to agree with that, at least in terms of like looking at the argument. It doesn't necessarily always sway someone's psychological disposition. The person could just be psychologically inclined to think that gods are not actually real, not actually the case. And I think Darth does not seem to get this nuance. Let me take a look at some of the comments coming in here, because a few of you have reached out to me here. Let's see here. Let's see here. I think Darth has surrounded himself with such stupid sycophants. They're actually dragging him down now. He's more interested in pandering to them than making a good argument. I think you might have a point there. I think that's part of it. He is taking in new information, though, at least to some extent, because I'm hearing something slightly different in some of these videos. I mean, he's still rehashing the old stuff and still just trying to sledgehammer this stuff into people. But this one was slightly different because he's sort of addressing agnosticism from a different angle. And I got to credit Tom Rabbittt for this. I think Tom Rabbitt's take on the, you know, when they kind of, and Alex Malpass, and I think, was it Ask Yourself? I think it was Ask Yourself, had kind of addressed this, one of the faults of his argument before was like, well, if one of the essential facets of your God is that it reveals itself to people, and it hasn't revealed itself to me, then, you know, I should know that God is real. I don't know that God is real, therefore that God's not real. Darth is now kind of actually playing around with a distinction from atheism that I've not been used to. Before, he was just trying to like settle a score with agnosticism in general. Like, agnosticism couldn't be real. You either are a God believer, a God acceptor, or you are a God denier. It's one or the other. And he does this to the point where if you are asserting facts that you think might be independent of God, or if you're not putting God first when you assert a proposition or something like that, then you're denying God, and therefore you're in trouble. I don't know how that is the case. Like, I've wondered about this. I don't know if I've ever gotten far enough in a conversation with Darth myself to ask him that, but I still don't understand how that works. And I'd be interested to hear if he can back that up. But let's see here. Has Darth ever encountered a proponent of verificationism? I don't know that he has. I'm not real familiar with it myself. I don't think that he's ever spoken with anybody that's well-versed in it. Although I thought I saw somebody in a video, one of Tom Rabbitt's videos, kind of come in at the end and say something like that. They were going to get into that with him. Yeah. Let's see. Actually, we might have an answer to that. Alex Ritchie, DD tries to argue that verificationism is viciously circular because he doesn't understand verificationism. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that would be an interesting discussion to have. I'm not well versed in verificationism, and I don't know that if he's tangled with anybody on any of his Discord channels where he spends most of his time. I don't know if anybody's recorded it. And I can't remember if the video that I saw, I could have swore I thought somebody tried to drop it on him. It didn't really go anywhere. It might have been one of Daddy Smoke's videos. His channel is relatively new. If you look him up, he's got some recorded content of mostly of him dealing with Darth a little bit, but a few other people as well. All right, I'm going to get back into this a little bit. Let's go here.
Is it your position? Is it your position that you withhold judgment as to the existence or non-existence of God?
I would say so.
Okay, now, but you've decided that it's not necessary to invoke God.
I've decided that it's seemingly not necessary to invoke God.
No, you believe that it's not necessary to invoke God.
I mean, I live my life as if that's the case, but...
Do you believe it is not necessary to invoke God?
This is the part that has always confused me about Darth's take on stuff. He talks about invoking God or referencing God. And like one of his favorite questions is it possible to... how does he put it? You know, do you believe it's necessary to reference God, you know, when referencing a fact which is, you know, that you've got, you know, requires a God to exist or something to that effect. I'm wording it poorly, but I've never really quite got this. Like, I understand, like, there's two things going on here. One is that all facts are contingent upon God. Got it. God made everything. Simple enough to understand. I think for most people, it has some logical entailments that get a little crazy. But that's easy enough to deal with. What he seems to be doing with this is like, in going after a worldview, he's saying like, well, don't you think it's necessary to invoke God when you're asserting facts which reference that God? And I don't understand why that's important, right? Like if someone is withholding judgment, or if somebody is inclined to think that the facts they reference do not actually stand in some kind of contingent causal relation to God, what difference would it make, right? They're either right or they're wrong. The fact that they assert the fact, and the fact happens to coincide with reality, and reality is dependent and contingent upon God. Okay, that they have the capability of recognizing basic things in general revelation. That's something that I think a lot of Christian theologians agree with. Darth seems to be saying, like, if you're asserting a fact and not giving God credit, that's somehow cheapening the actual grounding of that fact. This is the part that doesn't make any sense to me. And he hasn't really been able to demonstrate either one of those. And what I really don't understand is why he tries to tie them so closely together. It's like he's making them super dependent on each other, in an effort to make ontology and epistemology almost completely indistinguishable from one another. It stands to reason that, like, because the entailment, I think, here, without trying to ramble on about this, would be that, okay, well, if you can only know things that are ontologically real, grounded in God, then that means the only things that you can know would be things that are true. You couldn't know things that are false. Darth has kind of betrayed this before by calling things like fiction incoherent and false in the past. But then on the other side of things, it would be like, well, if I hold to an epistemology that isn't asserting God, then what I'm doing is sort of attempting to conjure up an ontology that doesn't exist. And that doesn't matter, right? That doesn't make any sense. Like, if my epistemology is lacking or incorrect, that doesn't ultimately affect ontology, at least in any way that I know of, in anything that I've read on philosophy. So I've asked him about this. I think the last time I had a conversation with him, I brought this kind of basic point up, probably not verbatim like that, but in that way. And I don't know that he understood what I was talking about. So it didn't go anywhere.
Not in everyday life, in any case.
So the answer is yes. You believe it's not necessary to invoke God as the necessary precondition of all facts that are not God.
Let's see this. Welcome, Stephen. Darth tells you what you believe, then makes you defend the position he told you you have. Yeah, that's essentially what he's doing. He's smuggling in his definition of God and his ideas about metaphysics, and then asking you whether or not you believe him or not. And then when and he only wants binary answers. Do you agree, yes or no? If somebody says, well, maybe this way, but not that way, well, now you're being sleazy and a prevaricator and an obfuscator and deceitful and a liar. Sorry to play up on the list thing, but he does kind of do that. Although he's got like the side list. I don't know if it's because he's chubby or something. I don't know. Anyway, I should stop punching down on that. But still, he puts a lot of stank when he says sleazy and deceitful, and that's what he thinks is happening. So, and all that's happening is somebody is trying to say, well, it's not exactly a one-to-one thing. I'm not saying it's either that way or not that way. I think it could be partially this way plus that, or maybe mostly what you said minus this other thing. Those nuances are not for Darth. He cares not for those things. He doesn't have time for that, those shenanigans. It's one or the other. Somebody else had a question here real quick. Oh, AJ, let's see. What he's trying to establish is that he has some unbroken causal chain that he can reference and you don't, so he can justify things and you can't. Yeah. I mean, ultimately he is, and that works when he's trying to say like all facts are dependent upon God and the thing that I find odd about what he's saying is it's as if what the facts represent is dependent upon God, but he's saying the facts themselves are dependent upon God, and I don't think that he's ever made a really clear distinction about that, because I think most people agree like there's differences between knowledge and belief. He might get into that in this particular video. When he addresses epistemology, he's not totally clear what he means by, and maybe somebody can correct me about this in the chat, what he means by a fact, other than if he says it's something like what, if he gives it the identical thing that he gives with knowledge, it's just that which conforms to the mind of God, in which case that's not informative. Yeah. Even if you ostensibly agree with Darth on a particular fact, he asserts the context is different because of the ontology, so you're not even correct when you agree with him. Yes, I think that's. I don't know that that's always true, but I think you're right. I think that I've seen him do that. Thanks, Ben Guzzi. Try not to ramble. Jeff was replaced by a pod person. I was replaced by a better version. Yeah, sort of a robot from the future with my consciousness uploaded and some side loaded upgrades. Welcome from the future, by the way. It's warm here. All right, let's see. Darth tells you you're being argumentative during an argument as if it's a bad thing. Makes as much sense as saying I was horny during sex. Well, yeah. Yeah, it's odd because I've mentioned this before, that he will tell somebody like you're just being argumentative, and then the next statement go into a description of he does this all day, every day, and has been for 10 years. Like, okay, what you've just told me is that you spend most of your waking life and have done for the last 10 years in social media arguing about God. If that doesn't make you argumentative, I don't know what does. Well, you might get your wish. I don't know. Maybe I've exhausted him, Doubting Thomas, but maybe Otangelo will appear.
God, guess what? That's not withholding judgment from God. You've decided that God's not necessary.
And then we're back to the whole thing about me acknowledging
You
that my
just-
belief.
But see, this is weird. Like if Nikolai was saying that it's one thing to say that it's not necessary to reference God when you assert a fact, and very different to say that all facts don't require a God, right? You could believe one and not the other. And I haven't heard from Darth an explanation saying why the two of them are so connected that if one breaks down, what happens to the other? Like, I don't understand what. And I have asked him that, and it was months ago when I asked him. I don't understand what the connection is to, someone who, and I'm going to get into why I think that's potentially dangerous and why I think he would probably have a hard time dealing with some possibly even mainstream theologians if he was trying to use this as a reason.
Have you decided that God is not necessary?
And now we're back on the whole thing about my beliefs not dictating.
Have you decided that God is not necessary?
It's not undead Bernie Sanders. It's actually like RoboCop Sanders. It's pretty cool. Yeah. He went very in his robot form. He went pro corporate pretty quick. I mean, there's lots of good benefits and stuff, but let's see here. I always found it weird that DD hates the Catholic doctrine of faith through works. What does he think decades of providing stupid apologetics is, if not works? Yeah, that's a little weird. I like I said, I always have a problem when people get worked up about the idea that Catholics believe in a faith through works, mostly because they don't. If you know Catholics or if you've done the catechism, you kind of know what you're talking about. That's not what those are. Those don't get you saved. They believe in grace and faith. But the other thing that I find weird about it is that Christians, unless you're a universalist who believes that God, that Jesus died for everybody's sins, and whether you agree with it or acknowledge it or know it or what, everybody's saved. You believe in some kind of work in order to get saved. You believe that repentance is necessary, some kind of act of begging for forgiveness or whatever. And then obviously, if you're involved in it with a group of Christians, they do put expectations of behavior on you. So that starts to get even stranger. The more you start to associate with other Christians, you start finding out that there actually are lots of things that you are expected to do now that you are saved. It's quite, when you ask them, well, if I happen to do one of those things, do I lose my salvation? If they're Protestants, non-denominationals, anti-Catholic, they don't really have a system set up for venial and mortal sins. So the ones that you can do what you just need to be sorry for, but you don't lose your forgiveness, and mortal sins where if you don't do something about them, you've lost your salvation and you will go to hell if you don't get forgiveness again. In sort of the non-denominational and Protestant affiliated churches I grew up in, they were quite unclear about how that works.
Waiting.
I just I had to take some.
Have you decided that it is not necessary to invoke and reference God as the necessary precondition of facts?
That doesn't seem necessary. Like, you'd only have to do that once. And you don't have to do that. Just facts do themselves, the way that Darth's deciding them. Like, and if he's asking this question, he does a better job of asking this question in the next video. But it's a common one that he asks. How did you reach the conclusion that not all that some facts are not dependent upon God? There's actually quite a few facts that should not be dependent upon God, given Darth's worldview. But I haven't ever heard anybody throw those in his face, and I'm going to get to those in a minute.
Everyday life, sure.
Good. Guess what?
Add.
This is the Oyo personal gym. I've sold over 100,000
What
units.
in the hell?
It
Okay.
uses
That
I don't
constitutes
wanna know what that is.
not withholding judgment about God. You have decided, you see, that's a
Oh, let's see here. Praise the yam. Jeff represents Darth partially with half-truths and manipulates the rest around to his perverse liking. Perfect profile of Satan. Well, I'm happy that you think that I rise to the level of Satan. I think that might actually speak to some of your Christian beliefs in a negative way there, Praise. Although I do think that in Darth's worldview, human beings have to be the ultimate standard and ultimate grounding for evil, which sort of defeats his definition of God and kind of blows up his worldview. I think it blows up aspects of your worldview too, as I've understood them in the past. But then again, you, I believe, are an idealist. You just believe that everything exists in the mind of God, so nothing's really real per se. Anyway, the half-truths here that I'm talking about, and I think it's important to point out, is that I have not seen or heard from Darth a reasonable, concise explanation as to why invoking the necessity of God when you assert a fact, because that fact necessarily references God, is somehow a requirement. I don't see how that's a thing. I can think of plenty of Christians who would say, no, all facts are contingent upon God because they represent actual things in the world around us which were created by God or by aspects of God's creation. So everything is ultimately contingent and dependent upon God. You asserting something and invoking God, you know, as what he's saying, that, like, and I don't know, do you have to say an incantation? Well, you know, I bought cat food in the name of Jesus, you know, I have a red car in the name of God, right? Like, those are facts, sure, about the world. I don't know that asserting that God makes those facts true is anything other than just a duplication, just a redundancy. You don't believe we're in the mind of God. Do you believe? Okay. All right. Well, I don't want to get into that. So, let's see. Remember, Darth says the Christian demon is a worldview doppelganger, even though demons with the power and motivation to deceive are real in his worldview. Yeah, that's always tricky too. And that's one of those things that comes up again and again in different Christian circles if you have discussions with them. One of the basic things of presuppositionalism is to assume that the skeptic is lying, right? That they're liars. Per Paul, everyone knows that there's a God, but some are suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. Now, some Christians have mistakenly taken that suppression of truth and unrighteousness to think of it in terms of like an almost Freudian sense of denial, like it's some kind of psychological thing. Others who don't have a very well thought out understanding of how self-deception works think it's no world different than interpersonal deception. In other words, you told yourself a lie often enough, you somehow came to believe it, even though you knew what you were telling yourself was false, and you knew your motives behind telling yourself a false thing were to confuse yourself, to deceive yourself. So it's that entails two different contradictions. So how the idea there being like, am I deceiving myself, or am I being deceived by Satan or by some forces or by sin nature? Which one is it? And if someone is well grounded than that, if a Christian's well grounded, say like Darth Dawkins or Praise, that should inform the way they treat skeptics. If they're being deceived by an evil one, anger against someone who is being deceived actively, either by sin nature or demons or the demon Satan, you'd think that they'd have a little bit more pity on this. But Christians like Darth Dawkins, and I've seen Praise do this as well, lash out in anger because Christians aren't making the right choices. They're not coming to, not Christians, excuse me, skeptics aren't reaching the right conclusions. They're not reasoning to the right conclusions. They're not accepting the right choices. and the right options. Well, those things, it sounds like what you're saying is that through our autonomous reasoning, we can come up with choices that that God would say are good. But that's not what most Christian theology believes in. Trusting in our autonomous reasoning would not lead to those things. We need grace. And if we're still confused and denying God, it's because we lack grace from a work of the Holy Spirit in our hearts. You should be sad for us. You should not be calling us human colostomy bags and liars and haters and all this other kind of stuff. This seems kind of ridiculous. It's inconsistent with, there's some inconsistent messaging going on there.
Another scumbag response. If you say so, you're a scumbag. If I say so, that's not a rebuttal. That's a sleazy response. So now we know you do not withhold judgment from God. You've made the judgment that it is not necessary to invoke God. So if you've decided God's not necessary to be invoked, that is the equivalent of denying the existence of God.
I'm rejecting.
That doesn't make any sense. Like, you don't have to invoke God when you assert a fact if facts themselves built in already reference God by necessity. And by definition of Darth's worldview, they automatically do. So I don't see why the one is necessary over the other than what I think Darth is trying to do is to create some kind of unbreakable link between epistemology and ontology that only he accepts. I don't know of too many other preceptors who really even talk like this in this particular way. Others will say I guess maybe they all kind of do, but they approach this in different ways. So
you're not understanding. Again, what you're doing is like a dog goes back to its vomit. You're trying to transform your judgment about that God is not necessary into a psychological state rather than it is propositional that God is not necessary. You've decided that God is not necessary, right? Right? You see how dishonest they are?
You hear how dishonest that question is. You decided that God is not necessary. Not necessary in what way? Not necessary when I assert a fact on my own, or not necessary for facts to be a thing that actually exists. Those are two different realms there. And I don't understand why he's doing this, because he's asking a question one way and it covers two different things. He's not clear about what he's talking about. Like, if he ran into a Christian who was like, no, I don't think it's necessary to assert that God is, assert God every time I assert a fact, or reference God when I assert a fact. That seems kind of odd. Though if it's a fact, it's dependent on reality, which is dependent on God's creation. And here's the other problem with it. What about facts that he probably doesn't want to reference God? If you have to reference facts of the real world, that you have to assert God's existence, then Darth's doing this both ways, there are certain facts about the world that should not reference God according to Darth's worldview, like weakness, ignorance, and evil, right? Those are things that are not part of God, and yet they exist in this world. God probably doesn't have any capacity of really dealing with them per se. When it comes to evil, that's the one that always usually gets thrown around the most as a problem. And usually when it's addressed by theologians and philosophers, they end up having to violate certain aspects either of the properties of the God that they're referring to, or they have to get into more problematic language issues when referring to that particular God, or they end up having to directly contradict one of the great-making properties that they've asserted that God has. In Darth's case, his God has to possess all great-making properties. By definition, that's how he's referred to it before. If there's anything else that's ultimate, even if there's another God even close to him, then he's obviously not ultimate. There can only be one ultimate thing. But clearly there are things that God would not be the ultimate representation of. God is not the ultimate in evil. I'll put this thought experiment out for anybody, and if anybody wants to push back on this, please let me know in chats later on, or tell me if I'm wrong. One of the things that really throws off a lot of Christians, and it's something that I like to discuss, if you get into the issues about the problem of evil or the nature of good and evil, one of the things that I think a lot of YouTube apologists don't like is the notion that God conforms to good and doesn't do evil, right? this kind of basically sets up an idea that there is a pure good and a pure evil, and God will only do the good thing and he abstains from all the evil things, but those two things are somehow separate from him and therefore outside of him. That's not something that Darth's going to hold to, right? If his God is ultimate, then his God is, it doesn't do only good things. His God is all goodness, right? Goodness comes from God. So God's good by definition. This creates a problem of when you have a God that's good by definition, nothing that it does is by definition bad or evil, right? So evil then has to be accounted for in a different way. If God isn't the grounding for evil, that means something else is. So that means you've got something that exists in the reality that he created that he is ultimately not responsible for. It is not contingent upon him. And if evil is contingent upon us, or if it says something like the ultimate representation of evil would be Satan, also a creation of God's, then we have a real problem, because the ultimate evil is either human sin, disobedience, or Satan, which means God is not ultimate anymore. That's kind of where I'm going with that anyway. But now, granted, malevolence, omni-malevolence is not probably what one would consider a great-making property. But Darth does a poor job of actually kind of making any distinctions like that. He just refers to his God as ultimate, foundational, the source of absolutely everything, and every fact is contingent upon him. Well, if evil is a fact, that fact is contingent upon God. Weakness is a fact. Some things are weak and lack power. That fact is contingent upon God. Things are ignorant. Humans are ignorant. That's a fact. That fact is contingent upon God. And those things are not things within that God's nature. So how do they account for those things? They attempt to account for those things by appealing to human frailty, human weaknesses, basically by appealing to themselves. People are dumb, therefore ignorant. People are weak-willed, therefore weak. People make mistakes and do bad things and they're selfish, therefore evil. Well, those are just kind of circular. They're not sufficient. How are they grounded? Those are facts that if someone like Darth asks you, how did you come to the conclusion that some facts or all facts are independent of God? List those three as three things that by Darth's definition, they better be independent of God. Otherwise, he has a lot of explaining to do.
Every day I show how deceitful and dishonest atheists are. We have his deceit and dishonesty on full display because they know if they bastardize atheism into a psychological condition, they can just say, "Oh, I have a psychological condition." So then that would mean if atheism is not the proposition that God does not exist, it's simply a psychological condition, then that would mean that theism is.
Let's give that a chat. Let's see. That's always been one of my rebuttals. If God creates and maintains all facts, then God creates the facts a person is being raped, then sustains the fact of that rape until done. Yeah, any act of evil. And he's actually coming up on a question here that he asks this guy. I think it's coming up here pretty soon. It's a mundane fact, and the way it goes, the exchange is strange. Of course, it's an exchange with Darth Dawkins, so it's not going to be anything other than strange. It's just the Euthyphro dilemma, and they try to deny it by changing the language. Yeah, I agree. And the odd thing is that there are guys like Praise, who's here in the live chat, that would say something like, no, the problem of evil is only a problem for skeptics. No, it's not. It's a problem for religious language, specifically religious language as it pertains to describing the Abrahamic God, right? When you try to get into those omni properties and try to suss that out with evil, you just keep running into contradiction after contradiction. And it's not an easy way to try to like if somebody wants to get into a conversation for sport with one of these guys and you really want to throw them off their game, if you study the problem of evil, you'll probably get them good and ticked off. But for the most, I've heard Darth try to say that he's been doing this for 10 years. He knows the problem of evil backward and forward. So he knows every which way that argument can go. I don't think that he does, because if he did, then he'd understand what some of his definitions at the beginning of his conversations with skeptics entail. They automatically set up some real problems with evil, and he just ignores them.
Simply a psychological condition, and therefore atheism and theism could be simultaneously true, as long as at least one person holds to either position.
Yeah, this is
I'll
weird.
ask you a simple question. Yeah.
Sure.
I'm
Theism
gonna
is
repeat. I'm
true.
gonna repeat this
I
again.
have a psychological condition. Dishonest atheists are. We have his deceit and dishonesty on full display because they know if they bastardize atheism into a psychological condition, they can just say, "Oh, I have a psychological condition." So
Yeah,
then that would mean if atheism is not the proposition that God does not exist, it's simply a psychological condition, then that would mean that theism is simply a psychological condition, and therefore atheism and theism could be simultaneously true as long as at least one person holds to either position. I'll ask you.
So I'm going to get into that in just a second here. Just to highlight this, yes, Ox. If you do the @Jefferson Spatchcock, depending on which screen I'm looking at, I'm on a small laptop. So if I'm watching this and I see it pop up on the YouTube feed that I'll go and check, I'll see my name highlighted. On StreamYard, I can see the comments coming through, but they don't highlight it like YouTube does. So I might miss some of these, so I apologize. Some of these are coming in kind of quick. So I'm trying to highlight them as much as I can. But yeah, put the ad on there just in case, because it is a little easier for me to even scan through the comments in StreamYard to see who's directing something directly at me. But this is the part where he starts getting into something I think, I don't know that I've ever heard him really talk about this. And I'm not exactly sure what he's saying. He's talking about like the idea of theism or atheism being psychological conditions. Now that's poorly phrased because like I brought up before, I don't know what he means by a condition. Like, is it something diagnosable? Or if he's just saying condition in the sense that it's a psychological disposition or an inclination. If he's saying that and he's like, well, if one person has this inclination, then that means it's true. Again, he's getting weird with that word too. Like, what does that mean? It's true. It's true that that person is not inclined to believe that there are gods. That doesn't mean that there aren't gods. And if a theist, and it does entail the idea that you can have a psychological disposition to believing that a god or gods exist, and it could be true that it's true that that person is inclined towards that belief. It's not true that that belief represents anything in actual reality. It works for both. The way he's kind of packaging it up here and trying to explain it is just, I don't think it's helpful to anyone.
Simple, yeah.
Sure.
Theism is true as if at least one person has that psychological condition, and then atheism would be.
See, that's a weird way of putting it. Theism is true if at least one person has that psychological condition. No, it's true that you could define someone as being inclined to beliefs towards God or gods. That's true. Is it true that theism is true because you have at least one person who is psychologically inclined towards the belief? No. And vice versa. Just because someone is psychologically inclined towards a belief that there are no gods doesn't mean that, in fact, gods don't exist by virtue of that belief. They're not the same thing. I almost think that at this point, Darth is confusing himself. Like, this might be part of like a conversation he had with himself in the shower and just kind of lost track, like got really frustrated with himself.
True if at least one person held that psychological condition. So that would mean that atheism and theism were both true.
I mean, we could just ignore the fact that...
Go away, little boy. Get a job, grow up. When you become thinking like an adult, like a young man, instead of reasoning to me like a...
I don't understand how that's a problem. Like, he points this out like this guy has done some kind of contradiction. Like, true in what sense? This is just a bizarre thing that Darth's throwing out there. Both of those situations can be true, as I've already described. What he seems to think is like, I don't know what he's saying there. If there's even one person that thinks that there isn't a God, that means that's actually representing reality. But we've got at least one other person that believes that there is a God, or maybe lots of gods. So at least that position is true too. Like, I kind of wonder if this is a symptom of like having your brain poisoned by like, kind of revelation epistemology. Like, if it's been revealed to this person and that's why they're inclined to believe it, then it must be true. Right. So I guess maybe I'm wondering if Darth thinks that no skeptic is actually inclined psychologically to disbelieve in God. They're just lying to themselves. Right. It might be necessary for him to believe that. I'm really not sure. If anybody's got any insight on that, I'd be interested to hear it. Let's see here. There are some other interesting but more mundane entailments of the whole creator and sustainer of all facts position, but too long to type in the chat here. Yeah, no, I agree. I got into a long discussion with that with my brother Alex Ritchie, and it took a while. We went down that rabbit hole for quite a while. I think I bored Jay quite a bit with that one. All right.
To see adolescent, then come back and talk to us.
Okay, and Hal is pointing out that the usage of the word atheist as a lack of belief predates the Stanford Encyclopedia definition that you give me.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in the least that you appeal to what are called outliers. Okay,
not outliers.
It doesn't matter. You could appeal to T.H. Huxley in the middle to late 19th century as advancing agnosticism.
Was going to appeal to
how is your position in an atheist substantively distinguishable from agnosticism when agnosticism is defined as neither knowing or believing in God?
Difference is an agnostic would simply say, I don't know. I have no opinion one way or
another. Did you hear how I just defined agnosticism? Did you just hear how, you see, I want everyone to notice. I
love this. So this guy's Ninklaw's trying to bring up a slightly different take on this thing. And Darth is furious that he just hasn't swallowed his take, Darth's take on T.H. Huxley's definition of agnosticism. So he's just going to keep trying to, scream this even more.
Atheists ignore what you say, and then they just resort to going to their little filing cabinet and pull out their selected cliches. I said agnosticism as defined by T.H. Huxley as neither knowing or believing that God does or does not exist. Okay? Did you know that knowing and believing are both within the circle of believing? They're both.
So that's not exactly what agnosticism is under T.H. Huxley's definition. It's not something like you don't know and you don't believe it, right? He's going to get into an idea like they're both subset, knowledge is a subset of belief, which is basically true. But the issue here is that the definition of agnosticism that Darth is trying to bring up from T.H. Huxley isn't just that it's not known or not believed, it's that it's unknowable. It's unknowable. And not everybody who is an agnostic believes that. You almost start getting closer to sort of being like an igtheist or what they call a theological, what they call a non-cognitivist, right? But the idea of a God doesn't make sense from the jump. It's so poorly defined that if you're asking me whether or not I agree with it or not, I don't know. I don't even understand what I'm rejecting, right? Non-cognitivism is a little bit complicated to get into, but in this particular this definition, that's an aspect of agnosticism that does get brought up often enough, right? It's not just that I don't know that there's a God, or I don't believe, I'm not inclined to believe there's a God, or a lacktheist kind of thing. It's that I don't think that God is knowable in any way. It's not something that humans can wrap their brains around. Darth kind of skips that part.
Belief states.
And knowledge is a subset of beliefs. Sure.
Knowledge is a subset of belief. The only difference between knowledge and belief is where one is claiming to have greater justification rather than lesser, because rarely do people believe things without any warrant or justification whatsoever from their perspective.
That's not entirely true. My brother and I were actually talking about this, and he gleaned a definition that is kind of an interesting. I hope I get this right. A kind of an interesting way of drawing a distinction between knowledge and belief. Knowledge is about something that has been obtained, right? Like some kind of information that has been obtained by us and maybe sustained or kind of validated. And belief is sort of the obtaining of that information, right? You're seeking with belief. Knowledge, you've got something that's been established, right? And those are sort of the two stages of it. This claim that Dawkins is like, most people aren't inclined to believe something they don't have any justification for. I think that's true, at least to a sense, but it's not necessarily true in the sense that like a belief is equivalent to knowledge, right? There are people that have reasons for thinking that the COVID-19 vaccine doesn't work. They're inclined to believe that, and they have their reasons for thinking that. Are they well-founded? Probably not. But they're based on things that they've been exposed to. They've been exposed to information. They've been exposed, whatever. They think they're, I hope this doesn't target this video for review. Get your COVID-19 shots if you haven't gotten them. Get vaccinated. Anyway, but people are inclined to believe all sorts of things with justifications that aren't necessarily good justifications, but they still have them. And oftentimes that's enough for a person to stake a belief claim to it. Is it the same as knowledge? No. But somebody can claim they believe something even on a hunch.
So you're trying to make a sharp distinction between knowledge and belief. It's not helpful to you. T.H. Huxley coined the term agnosticism. Okay, he said that agnosticism is neither believing or knowing that God does or does not exist. Atheists want to come along and commit the etymological fallacy and say that agnosticism, its meaning is derived from the root word in Greek. This is a fallacy. Okay, agnosticism is claiming to neither know or to believe in God's existence.
Thank you for that comment, John May. I would also like to do that as well, but oftentimes I hear this guy spouting stuff that it just kicks up enough dopamine that I feel like I have to say something about it. And yeah, I agree with you, Alex. Darth is making a fuzzy difference now. Knowledge, let's see, what's he got here? Knowledge for most is a belief with justification. Yeah, knowledge is usually like a justified true belief or something like that. Yeah, and yes, I think that I agree with you here, Alex. Darth is saying knowledge is lots of justifications and belief is few justifications. Yeah, that's not exact. Yeah, I agree. That's not exactly a good way of going about it.
Existence or non-existence. So how is atheism in any way differentiated from the definition of agnosticism that T.H. Huxley introduced?
Because part of T.H. Huxley's definition that Darth Dawkins is leaving out is whether or not God is knowable in a real way, right? And I don't think that, I wonder if Darth wouldn't wrestle with that because he believes in like revelation, even special revelation, God revealing yourself to you. I think even Pascal did too. Like that was part of Pascal's wager, right? That you couldn't really know. You were kind of using your reason, your best instincts, and a probabilistic gamble on the idea that, well, if it does exist, you better side with it. That way, if you die and go, then there is a heaven and hell, you go to the good place. But either way, you can't really know one way or the other. So it's best to just bet on the probabilistic idea that, if it is there, you get a really good thing, and if you don't, you look to lose lots more. There's actually problems with that, but there are better people than me that can explain the issues with that thing. Let's see here. God lacks biology. That means he has no biological sex. God identifies as a male. God is trans. QED. Let Darth chew on that. If he reads that I'm sure that will trigger him. Let's see.
Distinction, I believe, would be in the.
Okay. If I went, hey Nin, if I went through the United States and Canada and the Western English-speaking world, and I were to poll 100,000 people, okay? If I were to poll 1 million people, if I were to poll 50 million people and ask them the following question, saying, "What single word do you call somebody who denies the existence of God?" What would they say?
I'm trying to figure out why he went originally to the etymological source, right, for the word. Right, he was attacking that, and now he's doing like a kind of appeal ad populum. If I went and asked people about this, what do you think? They'd tell me what the word means. Okay.
Many of them would probably say atheist.
Gee, I wonder why they would say that.
Because that's what how.
No, you atheists are lying scumbags. You want to call yourself atheists. Okay, because you know what it means, but that you want to redefine it in a way that's indistinguishable from historical agnosticism so you can insulate yourself from defending what you really believe. But
this is goofy because there's a lot of atheists out there, like in more or less the mainstream, especially from the scientific side, that kind of embrace the lactism belief, right? And I think there's just as many philosophers that will posit both, Rationality Rules has a really good video on this, kind of explaining the differences between kind of a lack-theist approach, which is sort of the psychological, epistemological take on it. That is the psychological disinclination to believe in gods. And then sort of the philosophical take on it, right, which is the idea of either trying to propose that there might not be a God, right, if you're going to get into some kind of philosophical debate or something like that. So there's definitely, and I think he does a good job of breaking that down. I think he's planning on doing another one where he gets into the definitions a bit further. This idea that you have to be as an atheist, I think one or the other, I think is tired. I'm an atheist in both sense. I'm not psychologically inclined to believe in gods. That's just my psychological position. If someone like Darth asks me about the existence of the God he's defining and asks me whether or not I think it's real or not, I'm inclined, psychologically, I'm inclined to believe that it's false. But my argument would be that I think that by definition, it can't be real, that the God he's talking about is impossible to exist, because so much of what he's trying to say this being is self-annihilates. The more he explains it, it just keeps contradicting itself over and over again. But yeah, so that's and this doesn't get any better for Ninclow. The only reason this one went on for as long as it did, Tom Rabbittt put it in the description, Darth couldn't mute Ninclow because he's an admin. So he's just trying to, he will start yelling at him more to go away instead of muting him. Let's see. Darth could be harvested for dopamine. He does the same thing to me. Yeah. There's just something about the way that he tries to just bullshit through this stuff. It's the combination of trying to come off as down to earth and no nonsense when he's peddling what I think is nothing but blue ribbon grade A horse shit. He's doing a great job. He's doing a lot of heavy lifting. But trying to say that it's like, this is just a fact. I don't understand why you guys are so stupid. You don't get it. Like, you're throwing around words like truth and fact in ways that make people question if they're really talking to a person, or perhaps a computer program simulation of a person just designed to be, obstinate and stubborn.
Here's the bottom line. We smoked you out, okay? You believe it is not necessary to reference God as the necessary precondition, right?
Okay, here's the issue I have about
is that no? Can you answer my question? Do you believe that it is not necessary to invoke and reference God as the necessary ultimate precondition of all facts that are not God?
I've been obsessed with belts for a long time. I wear a belt every day.
No one cares about your belts,
like
my man.
Three things that I always show.
So again, that question, that same question, and I always wonder, like, why is that important? But
This guy's a joke.
Shut up.
You believe it's not necessary to reference God.
okay, what if it wasn't? What if it weren't? What if it weren't necessary to reference God? Would that change whether or not God was necessary for the facts Ninclow referenced? I would like very much if Darth Dawkins would like to explain that to me, or if one of his followers who's been listening to him talk like this, if they can give me a concise explanation of how that works, would love to hear it.
Right?
I mean,
It's a simple
sure,
question.
sure,
Good. There
whatever.
you go. Game over. Now we have the truth. If you believe that God is not necessary,
I apologize, Clout, for not playing the belt ad through, but I'm sure we'll see it again.
then you would have to believe that facts are independent of God because God's not necessary.
Right, and now we're back to the home. I believe.
I don't know. You don't have to reference God if you're asserting a fact. If you don't reference God when you assert a fact, does not mean you think the facts are independent of God. Why does he think that? Does anyone know? If anyone knows, please chime in.
Good. And so if you okay, and by the way, people who believe in God believe that God is necessary.
Okay.
If some
Right, but is he necessary to reference when you assert a fact?
somebody says that I believe in God, but that he's not necessary, then they're not talking about God.
Okay.
Okay. So you believe that it is not necessary to reference God as the necessary precondition. That is an indirect and implicit denial of the existence of God, whether or not you realize it. Do people commit informal fallacies without realizing it?
Yeah, that happens.
Okay, now, so they commit informal fallacies.
We're watching some of those informal fallacies being committed right now.
Whether or not they realize it. You can deny the existence of God directly and indirectly. You can deny God explicitly or implicitly, whether or not you realize it. As long as you are consciously affirming a proposition, and that proposition necessarily entails the non-necessity of God, you have denied God. Let me repeat that again. Is if you affirm a proposition, any proposition, and that proposition
folks,
necessarily follows from that or entails.
He's going to follow this up with a weird example. A simple example, but I thought it was weird.
The non-necessity of God. So you have stated that you believe that it is not necessary to reference God.
Right.
It follows from that, from modus ponens, if P, therefore Q. If you believe that it's not necessary to reference God, then it follows from that God cannot logically coexist.
And since he said something like modus ponens in there, it must be true, right? Because logic comes from God. Therefore, there's no getting around this, right? It's true by default. I love it when he does that kind of stuff. He'll slide that thing in there. I'm fairly convinced that Darth thinks that if you stick it in a syllogism, if the argument is valid, then it by definition is sound, and therefore it's like reading the instruction book for the universe. I mean, this dude is just daffy. I agree with this modus Darthans.
Because God, by definition, is the necessary precondition. If you believe it's not necessary, right? So when you believe that,
my belief be wrong?
Do you believe you can invoke the actuality and intelligibility of facts without the necessity of referencing God?
Yes, because how does referencing it make any difference? If the facts are already dependent upon God, what difference does it make if I reference them in my epistemology? If Darth Dawkins' worldview is true, then ontologically everything that exists because God made it. His God made it, right? So his worldview is correct. What difference does it make if I reference that God when I assert a fact? It's built into the fact that I assert. If it's correct, it's of God. If it's incorrect, I made a mistake or I'm lying. I don't really see how this is any more difficult than this.
Evidently so.
Good. You have now denied the existence of God. If P, therefore.
That doesn't make any sense. Like if you don't have to assert God in the fact that if what he's saying is true, then every time I invoke a fact and that fact happens to be true, at least I think this is where he's going with this, then by definition that I'm already talking about something that is contingent and dependent upon his God. Great. I have no problem with that. What difference does it make if I deny it implicitly or even explicitly at that point? That's my epistemology. That's it. I could still invoke facts. I have to by his other definitions given. General revelation. So if he's going to deny the power of general revelation, even to the sinner, even to the skeptic, he's questioning the power of general revelation. He's even questioning the power of special revelation. Because I should be able to know this stuff just by reading the Bible. That's special revelation directly from God. And yet, here we are.
For Q, we're done. Okay, you can. Okay, I have now explained to you for the umpteenth time how you are by implication denying God. Now you can continue to lie through your teeth that you're not denying God, but we all know that you are, because denying God is not simply only within the domain of explicitly denying God. Because all you have to do is affirm a proposition that implicitly or indirectly denies God, and you have denied God. And you have affirmed a proposition which implicitly denies God.
Well, this whole time.
So ignoring God or just neglecting to mention God is the same thing as saying that it's not there. Like this, I'm wondering if he really believes that's what's entailed.
Ninklau couldn't give a single rebuttal, so we can only take what he's saying as true, right?
No, because he's...
Ninklau has spoken about what 0.5% of the time in this conversation. So for J. Robin to pipe up and say, well, he can't even give, well, there might be a reason why he can't give a rebuttal. It's not because he hasn't the ability to provide a rebuttal. It's because he will not be provided the time. J. Robin.
He's craven. He's pathologically craven.
And here come the insults. It must be because he's a coward. It must be because he's a liar. It must be because he ate paint chips as a child, or someone dropped him on his head as a baby, right? Like this is weak.
To defend through verbiage that atheism is simply a psychological condition and doesn't have propositional content as to whether God does or does not exist.
I would like to point out, though, that I find it sort of interesting that you keep reiterating the whole thing about how, these new atheists, they are trying to redefine atheism to mean something that it doesn't mean. And then when I point out that, well, usage of the word atheist as a lack of belief actually predates.
Hey,
You're talking about here.
You're not understanding.
Robin,
I addressed that.
Mid-sentence. Yeah, you said
I
that
said
doesn't matter.
you can always listen to me. You can always find outliers.
It's not an outlier.
You know what an outlier?
The distinctions between lacktheism and then sort of like the philosophical position of like saying that there is no God, or attempting to put those are not, neither one of those positions really could be considered an outlier to the other. I think there's almost an equal number of philosophers that will talk about both positions. And I think that they're both informative. The other thing that's happening here too is that I wonder about this. Does Darth Dawkins think that people become atheists? Like some people become like join a club? Like, because I kind of wonder about this, because the last time I heard atheism was a name. It's not a name that is taken as a man, on as a self-identifier. It's usually given to somebody by an outside group. Christians were called atheists by the Romans because they didn't do the sacrifices. They didn't pay attention to the Roman gods, the Roman pantheon. So they're atheists, right? They're living without gods. Granted, they had their own, whatever, it was, invisible. But they're atheists, at least as far as the Romans were concerned. So this idea that you got a guy trying to force feed a skeptic a definition of atheism, not only force feed him a definition that Darth is insisting is the only correct one, but then trying to say that, any definition outside Darth's parameters is one that a skeptic is attempting to use as a way of confusing Christians. Atheists disagree about these definitions all the time. I mean, all you have to do is look to Nate Brody and Steve McRae and their long-standing arguments about blacktheism versus atheism, whatever. So,
Outlier is
Outlier wouldn't. Okay, I think I do.
somebody that is an exception to the rule.
Then
It doesn't matter. It is irrelevant that you can point to somebody, let's say in the 20th or 19th century, that wanted to define atheism as just simply having a lack of belief that doesn't constitute the denial. It makes no difference.
It was a designation used about all the early Christians.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, okay? Because what you're doing is when you are invoking this, it's simply a smokescreen to hide from the fact that via modus ponens, the proposition that you do affirm, it follows from that the denial of God. If you say, I believe it's not necessary to reference God.
Wasn't it Tom Rabbittt that was also attempting to use formal logic to lay out his claim? Like, your God's not real because I should know that it's real if it were real, following from the properties that you've given it. Darth had no problem, he did have some problems with it. He was stuttering and stammering around a little bit, but he just blows that off. So I'm trying to figure out why Ninclau should take Darth's usage of, some kind of formal logical construction when Darth doesn't respect them if it's used in a valid way.
Okay. Then that means via modus ponens, you believe that of the independence of facts from God.
If I say that I believe that facts don't correlate or don't.
Okay.
Okay. So
is it necessary right now? Is it necessary to reference God as the ultimate eternal precondition of the Eiffel Tower?
I don't think so.
Good. You have now denied the existence of God.
There you have it, folks. The Eiffel Tower exists because God, and if you say it exists for, the Eiffel Tower as a fact, stated as a fact, don't assert that God is necessary for that fact. You have denied the existence of God. Your worldview is now in shambles. Okay. And he's using a mundane fact, the existence of the Eiffel Tower. So I'm going to ask Darth, okay, the existence of evil. You believe that there is an objection, there is objectively an objectively definable notion of evil. Can you assert that fact without invoking God? No. Doesn't that make it so that if everything is dependent upon God, every fact is dependent upon God, evil as a fact is dependent upon God?
Do my beliefs dictate reality then?
You have denied the existence of God by implication, indirectly.
I have made a statement about my beliefs.
Right. So the Eiffel Tower, as a singular, actual, intelligible fact, in your view, does not necessitate invoking God as the eternal precondition. That is your position.
Right. And as a Christian,
Good. Now.
I was just going to make this exact point. If you don't get out your sentence in 3 seconds, he interrupts. It's exactly what happened just there. I don't even think he gave him 3 seconds. It was about 1.5, and he's already jumping on it. All his Brahman. I mean, at this point, it might as well be. Is it necessary? Shrugs. Yeah.
Let's get it clear. I don't even know why I continue doing this. I do it for the audience, not for your sake. Okay? Your position is now clear. The Eiffel Tower exists without reference to God.
No, okay. So when he phrases it that way, this is a good illustration of what I mean. Why I get confused. What does he mean by reference to God? Right? Like, I mean, if everything exists because God created everything, then yeah, it exists. Everything in existence is dependent or contingent upon God, based on Darth's worldview. But he's not asking that. He's asking, like, you're gonna assert the fact that there's an Eiffel Tower. Are you gonna try to say that that's not? Because, like, this makes no sense. Like, how does one assert a fact and invoke God at the same time? Because I don't hear Christians just adding that on every time they make a statement about facts around them. It's 68 degrees today because God, right? I'll be home from work at 5:30 in the name of Jesus. Like, I don't hear them doing that. So do you automatically assert God when you assert facts? You're automatically referencing God when you assert facts when you're a Christian, but when you're a skeptic, that's removed from you. Like, and how and why would that be? And how would it matter? In what way would it make the fact any less dependent upon God? Makes no sense.
Didn't say that.
You believe that it is not necessary to reference God when invoking the Eiffel Tower.
Yes, I believe that.
Okay, we're done. Listen, go away. Either you are severely retarded or you are a completely devious and deceitful young man. Go away. I don't.
Yeah, he has to yell "go away" because he can't mute the guy, and I don't think he can kick him either. Let's see here. You put so the problem of evil is a contradiction to all living property of a Christian God. Am I getting this right? Partially. There's actually a lot of issues. There's different issues and different problems of evil. There's sort of a logical problem of evil. I think there's a theological problem of evil. There's many different ones, and they're, if you actually look up some of the ones in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, some of the ones that they have a really good logical problem of evil that breaks down pretty well. Generally, what ends up happening with the problem of evil is that you end up in attempting to try to find out a way to either get God off the hook for being responsible for evil, or trying to reconcile suffering in the world. You usually have to appeal to something that's contradictory. Either it contradicts with that God's nature, it contradicts with the great making property of that God, it contradicts with previous explanations of what that God would do or has done. Some people will end up getting into, they'll get themselves out of trouble. They won't say suffering, because then you'll end up getting into a whole thing where, well, if getting a vaccination causes me pain, that's suffering, and it might make me a little bit sick for a little bit of time, but it will prevent me from this disease that's much worse. That suffering's not bad. generally what they'll end up getting into is problems of unnecessary suffering. I'll give different examples, like kids with various cancers, painful cancers and things like that. There is something to be said about bringing up problems of evil. The thing that I find most interesting about them is how quickly Christians will yeet them away from themselves to get away from them. There's a whole there are whole apologetics dedicated to the problem of evil. It's what do they call them? I think it's called a theodicy. Yeah, the vindication of divine goodness and providence in view of the existence of evil. So theodicies are a category of different defenses used to kind of combat arguments made from this problem of evil.
I don't want to talk with you anymore.
Okay, but before I leave,
you see how craven they are.
When
you
he
see
says,
how utter.
I see Nincloud attempting to continue to speak to Darth Dawkins and his sycophants, and Darth Dawkins is telling him, "Go away, you're craven." Okay, you can't make him go away, so you're just going to whine at him until he goes.
when
Dude,
he
you see
says
how
he believes
deceitful they
that,
are?
it means you believe it's true, dude. It means you believe it's actual.
Yeah, we're done.
That's what I believe it is.
We're done. We're done. I'm tired of your lying.
Right, that's why I'm not talking to you right now. So, Da Vinci,
we're done.
I don't really want to talk to you either. So
Yeah, I just want to talk to you.
Yeah, nobody
wants to talk to Parakeet.
wants to talk to you, Nicola.
You're
And you know who really doesn't want to talk to J. Robin? Skeptic Generation. Oh, they got tired of you quickly.
You know what you are? You're another atheist liar. This is how despicable you people are. This is how despicable you people are. Okay, you will lie right to our face.
Going to read this one out loud because it's dirty. I think half of Darth's minions have their flies unzipped while they listen to this crap. Yes.
When you know that we know you're lying to us and you're shameless about it.
But didn't I accept the narrative? I'm so sorry.
I feel sorry for you. You're a filthy liar.
I feel sorry for you too.
notice how he characterizes it as a narrative rather than an argument that necessarily follows.
Yeah.
These guys, Jesus, listen to them talk like this. It's just like you just want to hit yourself in the head with a hammer. I mean, he calls him a filthy liar. He didn't do anything to establish that the guy was lying. He didn't even really fully establish that the guy was mistaken. Like the guy barely got any clarifications out. So, but Darth's figured it out. Dan Clow is a filthy liar.
This is a problem. Can't even get a rebuttal. So why is he still talking?
This is the.
I'm actually, I got a hand, yeah, I agree, J. Rob. I don't know why Nencloud is attempting to talk to any of you because none of you are going to let him say anything. When he does start talking, he gets interrupted. But the tiny fraction of the amount of time that he spent talking in this was enough for Darth Dawkins to conclude that the man is an inveterate liar. So, and I guess that's enough for Parakeet and J. Robin. So J. Robin is probably, it's engaging with people in this way. Probably got you banned from Skeptic Generation if you're watching.
This is the ugly, lying face of modern atheism. Okay, you're seeing it on full.
And this is sort of the decrepit, rancid, nonsensical, incoherent death rattle coming out of contemporary Christian nationalistic fundamentalist evangelicalism. Right? These are guys sitting around talking about this stuff, just they got to get rid of these atheists, right? I'm pretty sure Darth Dawkins is one of these guys who kind of fetishizes the Old Testament, right? Like he believes we have to get Trump back in office so that God will continue to bless our nation, as if Americans are modern day Israelites. Lots of Christians believe this, even though that's not exactly what Paul preached in the New Testament. So a lot of new Christians are basically like kind of fan fiction Israelite weirdos. They sort of like grab onto like Zionism in any way that they can so that they can turn themselves into warriors for Jeebus or something like that. But that's what I think you're seeing here. Darth doesn't have a good grasp on a lot of the stuff that I think he holds to. And it's odd because he could use this sort of basement time with some of the dwellers that he's with in Discord to really kind of hammer out some of the weaknesses of his argument, but he doesn't. He's just constantly on the offense. And by offense, I mean, he's being offensive to everybody, including other Christians.
Full display here. They can't defend what they really believe. So they're like little children. Okay. Oh, I don't have.
I'm not going to comment on that, Mr. Lumpkin, but well done. I guess I commented on it anyway.
I have a belief in God, but I'm not saying that God doesn't exist. So like the little child who puts their head under the pillow, Daddy, you can't find me.
I was just saying that, Darth. Like, I don't understand how you said, like, it doesn't, like, if I don't reference God in certain facts, that doesn't mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that God doesn't exist. And you haven't demonstrated the connection between those two yet. I want an actual explanation as to why these things matter, other than to like try to like fold this into some reason. If this is just an attempt to try to tell somebody that their worldview isn't credible or is just incoherent from the start or any of this other kind of nonsense, you'd have to explain that too, because I don't see how that holds to this.
He admitted, go away.
Ian,
He admitted, go away. He admitted that he believes that it's not necessary to reference God. Okay, which means he believes that facts are without the necessity of referencing God.
So what? Does that mean that all the facts aren't based on God? So it's the same thing?
And if you believe facts exist and possess intelligibility without the necessity of referencing God, that is the equivalent of saying facts exist independently of God. And if you
Okay, but that's not exactly what you've been telling people, though, is it? That those are not the same thing.
believe that facts are independent of God, then from that perspective, God cannot logically coexist, which constitutes the denial of God. Yet they don't want to admit what their position is, so they continue to lie.
Moving on.
I hope you got this for your recording. Hey, YouTube out there, Tom Rabbittt likes to record these.
All right, before I move on into that, let me take a look. Let's see. Darth is engaged with actual philosophers, and he never understands what they are trying to explain. Yeah, I've seen quite a few of them. Done a few explanations on them. They have been banned. Or they've been terrible. Right now, Darth is PMing. What is it? PMing the server owner, demanding that Ninclaw lose his admin rights. Yeah, that's probably that. I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. Although he didn't seem too worked up. He was just whining that the guy go away. Like if he'd gotten like so angry that he was like dropping F-bombs and stuff, then I definitely think he would have been looking to have his privileges taken away.
Hey, Tom Rabbittt.
Hey, Darth, how come no one ever challenges you anymore?
All right, Darth, do you want to debate?
How do you challenge the word of God?
Yeah.
It's surprisingly easy.
I'm an atheist.
Yeah, well, tell me why you're an atheist.
So, Darth is sounding especially perfunctory at this point, and I'm starting to think that maybe he's been on for several hours at this point. Because tell me why you're an atheist. Like it's like he's running just like a call-in show. He should know better. He should pace himself. You get to this point where you're that spent, and depleted. You're not good for your audience anymore. Your audience of flying monkeys.
I have no reason to believe in God.
Okay. This is one of those questions that usually comes up, right? So Darth usually asks one of the three. How come God doesn't, how is it that God doesn't exist? Why doesn't God exist? Or why don't you believe in God? Sometimes worded as, what is your reason for not believing in God, right? All three of these are slightly different questions. If you answer with, well, I don't have any reason to believe in God, what you're going to get, if you don't get yelled at first, you're going to get, and eventually he will get to this question. He definitely must have been tired here because he doesn't bother with any preamble. He goes straight to it.
So that's the equivalent of saying that all the facts that you're acquainted with do not necessitate referencing the necessity of God.
Okay, here we go again.
How did you come to that determination?
I basically hold the view that I can understand the world through my own senses.
Right, that's a non-answer. Okay, so
that kind of is a non-answer for the question that Darth's asking, but because the question is so bad, it's worth kind of breaking down. So, given what we were watching before, where he's trying to like get into this whole thing, like, well, all facts are contingent upon God, and when you assert a fact, you must reference the necessity of God when asserting that fact, which references the necessity of God. I hope that didn't sound too repetitive, but it often does when Darth says it. The issue that comes up for me is, how did you conclude that facts don't necessitate God or something like that? You don't have to assert them. And I brought this up earlier on. The problem of evil, the existence of ignorance, the existence of things like weakness, these kinds of things seemingly completely violate God's properties and his character, his nature, and yet they exist, and they might exist in an ultimate representation somewhere in the universe. If that's the case, then we have an ultimate being, in some sense of the word, that is something other than God, right? And it's grounding. It might, if it's the source of that thing, if it's the source of weakness, then it might be grounding that thing. So if humans are the source of evil because of sin, and we're the source of ignorance because of our lack of omniscience, we have these deficits, we might be ultimately evil, right? And we are completely, depraved, according to most Christians, right? Without Jesus' salvation, Jesus' sacrifice and his death and resurrection, we wouldn't have a chance at salvation. We're that evil. So it's two different ultimates, I think. An ultimate God and an ultimate creation, ultimate good, ultimate evil. But if you start going into that, you start conceding that, then there are facts that are not contingent upon God. And I think once you do that, God starts breaking down.
When you say you don't have a reason to believe in God, then there's two worldviews. You either believe in the worldview of God or you believe in the worldview of not God. Okay? You understand the dichotomy? Hello?
Yes, yes, I do understand.
Okay, so in the God worldview, all things derive and depend upon God. In the not God view, all things are independent of God. What's your reason for believing in the not God worldview where everything exists independently of God? What's your reason
Evil.
for that?
Please, there is no apparent, I cannot,
And here's the thing. It might sound a little flippant when I'm putting that out there, but it holds up. Like, I myself don't tend to believe in an actual thing like evil outside of I tend to be kind of a nominalist when it comes to things like that. But when someone like Darth comes along and says this, well, what's your reason for thinking that there isn't a God? It would have to be concepts like this, right? The other thing would be his general revelation, right? If I'm in Darth's worldview, right, and a lot of people have tired of these examples, so I'm going to apologize from the jump. This kind of came from people like the New Atheists and people like Stephen Fry, but it's worth bringing up. If someone like Darth can assert the importance of general revelation in coming to the conclusion that there is a God, what they would argue is the inevitable conclusion that there is a God, one of the things we observe in nature are things like kids being born with cancer, babies being born without brains, horrific suffering and early death for seemingly no reason. Stephen Fry brings up the example of the existence of a fly that devours the eyes of children, making them blind. Like that's what this thing, that's like seemingly all this thing does. Why do those things exist? If that's general revelation, or hell, even just the actions of man upon man too. If one takes a look at the early 20th century, a history of war and Holocaust, I mean, according to Darth, all of that is dependent upon God. And I think that if you're going to claim that, then you have to wrestle with, one, notions of its nature, and two, notions of its omniscience and omnipotence, right? Which I think are basically linked anyway. But that would be my reason for thinking that I'm not inclined to think that there is a being as defined by Darth.
I don't know why I would believe in God. There's no reason for me to believe.
Yeah, that's not an answer to my question. Okay. See, the question that I just gave.
I find that kind of weird too, because the common one is that I don't have a reason to believe in God. I actually tell some of these guys that I have reasons to believe that there isn't one. Right? There's pretty good evidence to demonstrate, and I like this. Jay Garfield, I think, gave this answer to him. He pointed out problems with God's nature, basically problems with religious language. He pointed out the kind of self-annihilating aspects of that language. He pointed out theodicies that kind of come from that, specifically the problem of evil. I can't remember what the third one was, But they were very naturalistic explanations too. That there are better naturalistic explanations for a lot of these things, and a lot of them work even better if you presuppose that there isn't a God to begin with. So when you take those kinds of things into account, it's not that you just don't. I don't have a reason to think that there's a God. I actually have pretty good evidence to think that there isn't one.
Gave you the question that I just gave you exposed the fraud of your position. Okay.
Yes.
So you can either believe in X or not X. Okay. If you say I don't have a reason to believe in X, right, and therefore you are holding to not X, do you have a reason for not X? So give me your reason why there's no God. Okay. Saying I don't have a reason is an adolescent type of a response. So what's your reason? What is your reason to believe that what is ultimate is not God? Okay.
This is where language gets tricky, and Darth is not charitable with this kind of stuff. If someone answers him and says, like, I don't have any reason to believe in God, what they're likely referring to is, what they're saying is they don't have any reason to believe that God is actually true, right? They're not trying to say that they don't, it's amorphous, it's confusing, I just don't know one way or the other. They're saying they don't have any reason to think that that's actually real, right? I do think that is something, I don't mind that answer, but I think it is slightly glib, especially if you're going up against somebody who's going to try to chew you up over it, over word choice and everything else, like Darth Dawkins. Because you do have a reason for why, you probably do have a reason for why you don't believe it consciously. And you may be able to consciously articulate your psychological disposition towards why you're not inclined to think that there are gods. So you can kind of get into both. One of the problems that Darth has is that if you give a reason for why you personally don't believe, what is sort of informed that psychological disposition, say it's something like comparative religious studies, where you've seen that lots of different cultures have had very similar stories, and then they've had different contradictions, and that sort of informs that, okay, maybe this isn't so special after all. This is actually just a transmission of different cultural norms over time, and that there really isn't anything to this other than maybe just storytelling amongst humans. Dr. Josh Bowen attempted to give him that reason, and Darth Dawkins accused him of the genetic fallacy. That was before he'd gone on to tell somebody like Ninclau about psychological conditions. So maybe now he's learned better. But if you try to give him the justification for your psychological disposition, he'll deny it and try to say that it's fallacious, which is stupid, because he asked why you don't believe. If he asks how come or why there isn't a God, then he's asking for something different. He's not asking for your psychological disposition. He's asking for the reasons or the mechanisms you think make God impossible or make God not exist. If anybody takes anything from this, hopefully that's helpful.
What is foundational and fundamental to all states of affairs is not God. What's your reason for believing that?
Well, clearly there is something fundamental. So clearly,
right.
A ball falls down here, falls down over.
Yeah, I don't need a lecture. Okay, please address the question which you have not answered.
Absolutely.
What is your reason to believe that what is fundamental to all states of affairs is not God? Because if you don't answer that direct question, then you are violating your own criterion of belief.
How? He doesn't explain how, right? Like, his criterion of belief is that there has to be something fundamental. So he's just inserted that into this guy's worldview. If this guy's never considered his worldview from that, like, this guy could be basically like a pure coherentist or something like that, where everything just sort of coheres to itself, in cycles and loops or whatever. He doesn't have any kind of foundationalist take on any of this stuff. Darth Dawkins has to be like a hardcore foundationalist, right? Because he believes in an ultimate God that is the establishment of absolutely everything. And he approaches everybody as if that's how they approach this aspect of reality. And some people don't approach it one way over any of the other two, right? Like, you could kind of approach it with infinitism, coherentism, foundationalism, but you don't necessarily have to, from my understanding, you don't have to pick one school over the other. Part of the trilemma that describes that with regards to epistemology is that we have a tendency to sort of back up certain claims in truth in one of those three ways, and all three ways have problems. Darth believes foundationalism is the only one that works because the foundation he's just asserted into the mix is God, right? So obviously infinitism doesn't work because that one precludes the existence of the foundation he's picked. So that can't be true, so he just excludes it. Coherentism doesn't work because then things just cohere to each other, and so they're sort of interdependent rather than independent, but they're interdependent, and he doesn't like that because that also seems to make it seem like things are independent of God, They're not independent of each other, though. But that's a distinction he doesn't care about. What he wants to do is assert foundationalism, push that narrative in there, and then claim that if you don't have an identification of something with very similar properties or identical properties to what Darth Dawkins is talking about, then you've betrayed your worldview. How did he put it? Let's wind that back just a couple seconds.
It's not God. Because if you don't answer that direct question, then you are violating your own criterion of belief.
You are violating your own criterion of belief. How? Does he know? I mean, Flatboss could be one of these guys that says, like, no, I'm just a coherentist. But as far as I know, he hasn't established that. That hasn't been established yet in this. All he's told Darth Dawkins so far is that he doesn't have a reason to believe in a God.
My reason would be that it seems to function perfectly well without God. And also...
No, okay, stop right there. That is a childish answer that you just...
Students with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension. But no.
I don't have the attention span for that.
Okay. And when you say it seems to be, it doesn't matter what seems to be, because what seems to be is not necessarily the case. Now, what is your rational...
So what seems to be isn't necessarily the case. Well, that's interesting. That doesn't apply when you're doing the whole like asserting a fact without asserting God or not referencing God, right? It doesn't seem to be. I would agree with him there. Just because it doesn't seem to be doesn't mean it doesn't follow that it's not. No, that's true. It could be that there's something more to it. But if Darth's ultimate thing is, well, can you prove that it's not the God I'm talking about? Well, then he's just engaging in an appeal to ignorance. And so nobody really has to take him seriously at that point.
Justification that what is fundamental to all states of affairs, that it is not God.
It is a law, right? And that is not God. Okay, so it is...
What is it that is foundational and fundamental to all states of affairs?
I would use the word...
States of affairs. I don't know. This is such a... he's still engaging in this stuff, like just again and again and again. And it still amazes me why he does this. And everybody that saw this before, anybody that commented on this earlier, this is exactly right. He is shoehorning in the definition of his God, right? Because the one thing that will happen is that if somebody tries to put in an alternative, if they try to say states of affairs themselves, reality, existence, any of these other kinds of things, he will come back with, well, no, that can't work because they're not. He got into this argument at least once with T-Jump. Those aren't it's not a concrete singular thing. It's not a concrete one. It's a concrete many, and therefore it doesn't work somehow. That's reality. So he'll end up focusing on the fact that basically, if it doesn't conform to a doctrine of divine simplicity, which is not universal amongst Christians or other theologians and even other religions, but if it doesn't, it's not divinely simple. And it has to, I think I lost my train of thought on that one, but the trap that he's trying to set in this at this point, it's not even really a trap. It's just a definition game. He really is just trying to make you're going to, the other properties, it has to be a mind, right? Before it just has to be the foundational source of all possibility and impossibility. But if somebody picks reality or existence, those things aren't brains, like a big giant floating brain, or a mind, quote unquote. Therefore, no. All of a sudden, a new requirement comes up.
Word Dharma, right, which means basically the order of things, which we have.
Sir, what is it? What is it that is foundational and fundamental? What is it? What is its property and attributes?
It will be something like rationality or.
No, sir. Like no. Listen to me. Mm-hmm. Well, then if it was rationality, then you would be talking about God. If what was fundamental and foundational is a mind, then that's what we call God. But you reject that. So you say, I don't have a reason to believe in God. So the reason why I'm asking you this question is it's smoking out your fraudulent position. Mm-hmm. You have a pseudo-intellectual position. Oh, I don't have
a pseudo-intellectual position because he doesn't have Darth's position.
A reason to believe in God. Good. What's your reason to believe that what is foundational and fundamental to all states of affairs is not God? The answer is you don't have a reason. Okay.
Right. So, look at this point, like Darth's doing some of the heavy lifting for this guy.
Okay.
Well, I would say that the definition of God is important.
You're not. Listen to me. This is why I have such frustration
Yeah, I got to say, yeah, for Flatbass here at this point, yeah, it's too late. Like if he wants to try to like wrangle definitions of God at this point, you can't. You just have to kind of roll with the nuggets that Darth drops along the way. And sometimes it's better to answer something in a way that's wrong to get him back into that next phase. So if you were to say like, oh, well, what's fundamental to my worldview is reality, then he's going to start quizzing you on those kinds of things, and he'll say reality won't work because it's not simple, it's not divinely simple, and it's not a mind. And then as you start building up a collection of different properties of God, then you can start kind of showing how they contradict. Maybe about the time you start bringing up those objections is about the time he will mute you.
Dealing with certain atheists, you are reasoning to me like a teenager. Are you a teenager?
No, sir, I am not.
Okay, now listen carefully. You believe in the not God world. Now,
yes.
What is it specifically that institutes and dictates everything that is, can be, and cannot be? And don't say reality, because that's not an answer.
Uh-oh. Definitely tired here, because he's helping Flatbus out at this point. Like he's just like, no, don't say reality. Not going to take that because that doesn't work. Handy. But again, the way he's defined that's how he defines God. So that's all you can do. The weird thing in this is that if somebody were to answer him with something transparently atheistic, atheisty, well, it's pink unicorns, or magic space whales, or transforming fairies, or something like that. Whatever you want to throw out there, those things have those properties. Well, then they'll jump down your throat because you don't actually believe in those things. But again, it doesn't matter what you label them. The package of whatever those things are, he's insisting you have to believe in. You believe in this. You do. And he's going to get you there.
I use the term Dharma. It's basically an order
of
things.
What is it? That's a non-informative answer to me. What is it that is fundamental? Since it's not God, then you must believe in something else that is fundamental or foundational to all states of affairs. And you must have a reason for that, right?
Yes.
Good. What is it, and what's your reason why that is?
Well, it is some kind of law, because it's,
No, you're just making this up as you go along. You don't have an answer, do you?
I think I do, but that's
Tell me specifically, what is it that is foundational? What is it? What is the ground of all existence?
It is Dharma, like I said. You don't like that answer.
Hey, listen to me. I don't know what that means. Okay.
Yes.
What is it that is foundational and fundamental?
No. Oh, great. He says he doesn't. He doesn't know what Dharma means. He doesn't ask him to clarify the meaning of Dharma. He just repeats the question that got him the answer Dharma. Like, very sleepy. Darth needed a nap. He needed a binky and a nap before he took on this. And this isn't really this really isn't that heated a conversation. It's just
the structure of reality, the way.
No, you're not understanding. Okay,
that's possible.
When you say the structure of reality, remember I told you don't say reality because that's a non-informative answer. Reality is a term that just encompasses the set of all real things. Okay, that doesn't tell me what is foundational. All you're just saying is everything out there, all of the discrete entities, they just are. That doesn't tell me what's fundamental.
Yeah, but I didn't say it was reality. I said it's
listen,
law of reality.
I'm not trying to be. What does that even mean? That's non-informative.
But the ultimate grounding of everything that is possible and impossible is informative. Like how is something causative also causative for things that aren't caused? You want to explain that one to anybody in a way that's actually informative, Darth, or what? Like, come on. Yes, this is a set is a fucking single. Yes, it is. I don't know why Darth has this issue with this. It's just like he tried to do this with somebody else. It might have been a couple videos back that I haven't reviewed, but he was trying to say like you can't have. Oh, he was arguing with somebody who was a polytheist, and naturally in his mind you can't be a polytheist because you can only have one ultimate God, right? And I thought it was kind of weird. I haven't really heard any polytheists actually argue that. Well, no, I believe in one ultimate thing, a pantheon, right? And then I would imagine that Darth would get into the whole thing where no, you can't have a set of things do that because it's too many things. Like you can't have a set like 3. You couldn't have a set of 3 persons maybe. I don't know if you've heard of that, Darth.
Okay.
What would be informative to you? Can you?
I'm not trying to give you a hard time. I'm just trying to show you that your answers are nonsensical.
He is specifically giving this guy a hard time. He didn't know what Dharma meant and didn't even bother to ask. Like, if he's not there to give him a hard time, he could at least pretend to be curious enough to ask this guy about the definitions of the terms he's using.
Yeah.
They're vague generalizations. You see, when you say you don't have a reason to believe in God, do you have a reason to believe that which is fundamental? What specifically is fundamental?
Do you have a reason to believe that which is fundamental? That's a weird way of saying it. Are you asking me if I believe that there's something that is fundamental to absolutely everything? I don't think that there is. That's probably the key difference between someone like Darth Dawkins' worldview and a lot of skeptics. Or it could be somebody who's a skeptic that believes in something foundational like quantum fields or quantum forces or something like that. But I'm sure if somebody went down that road, if they're particularly good with physics and stuff and they tried to use that thing, Darthy boy there's probably, one of his YouTube Google PhDs is probably in debunking physics. He's going to tell them why that's not true, right? Because quantum fields aren't a mind. They don't have a will.
Can you elaborate on what kind of answer would be sufficient?
I want to know, since God is not fundamental, okay?
Yes.
You don't have a reason to believe in that, then you must have a reason to believe that in what is fundamental that's not God. What is it?
Well, you don't like my answer, but it's the same answer.
All right, listen, you have the mind of a child, sir. Have a nice day. You see, you don't have.
Okay, insisting that someone play with one toy, and specifically your favorite toy, it demonstrates the mind of a child, Darth. That's what you're doing. Like, no, we're not gonna entertain these other things. We're just gonna entertain this thing, and you are gonna acknowledge it as the best. Or you can get out of my room and never come back to my house. I'm telling my mom.
Have a rational basis for your atheism. I know why you're an atheist, because you don't want there to be a God. That's why you're an atheist. You do not want to acknowledge God as your creator. So you come up with these pseudo-intellectual reasons why you're an atheist. And I just proved it to you and everyone else in the room, because when I ask you what's your reason to believe in what is fundamental that's not God, you have no answer.
Well, you didn't like my answer.
Okay, see, that's another childlike answer.
But it's fair, right? He gave you an answer and you said you didn't know what it meant and then just repeated your question. That's pretty childish.
The issue has nothing to do with liking your answer. What it had to do is your answer is non-substantive. Do you understand?
I mean, to be fair, I mean, what you're talking about is like kind of metaphysics, right? Isn't the point of this to be kind of non-substantive? Sorry to get into distinctions there, but god damn, man.
You are a sleazy person. Okay?
Uh-oh, he's sleazy. I don't understand why Darth thinks Flatbus is sleazy at this point. And nothing... Probably because he just didn't accept the foundation. I'm kind of wondering if this would be the case. It might be an interesting thing to do if you just accept that it is God and then get into the discussion with him. But I think Tom Rabbitt's done this with him. I think other people have done it with him too, where you just sort of accept these initial questions, get into his worldview, accept that his worldview and our worldview, everybody's worldview is fundamentally just a Christian worldview, and then maybe you get an opportunity to pick it apart from the inside. Because at this point, when he's trying to ask these questions and somebody's trying to stay away from his definitions, this is where he does this is where he inflicts most of his confusion.
Okay? You know why you're sleazy? You know why you're sleazy? It's because that was a dishonest, deceptive response. You admitted you didn't even know what it meant. So how do you know he was deceiving you? And then you didn't ask for clarification. Well, so whose fault is that? If you're confused, that's on you. You don't blame the person for deceiving you. You didn't know what it meant and you admitted to it and then didn't follow up. That my objection to what you say is not because I didn't like it. My objection was because it's non-informative.
I mean, you liked it so much that you asked for follow-up. I mean, Darth at this point is just being ridiculous here. I mean, I thought he was just, well, I think he is. I think he's just tired.
It's non-substantive. You know this and I know this, but rather than admit the truth that you gave me a non-substantive response, you want to be a little sleaze bag and saying, oh, you just didn't like it. Go take a flying leap, you lying piece of garbage.
I think that's rude. I think that's a rude statement.
No, I'm telling you off. Oh, and you weren't rude to me?
I think I've been very cordial.
No, you were rude to me. You go, oh, you just don't like it. You are impugning my intellectual objection, okay, that was rude.
That's it. That's all it takes to piss him off. Wow, this guy hasn't been rude. Like, and if you think like, no, I gave you my answer, you just didn't like Darth or something like, oh, you impugned my intellectual objection. Uh-oh, somebody peed on Darth Dawkins' PhD, the one that he wrote out in crayon on a napkin.
Rude.
Well, I would love to continue talking, but I don't.
Yeah,
I want you to elaborate.
Would love to continue talking with you because you're a dishonest person. Goodbye.
Oh.
I get quickly
Good day, sir.
agitated when people like you are deceitful with me, and then you impugn me by going, "Oh, you didn't like the answer. It had nothing to do with me not liking it."
Oh, so you did dislike it. It had nothing to do with you not liking it. Are you saying that you didn't like it? What else?
Told you your answer is non-substantive.
You said you didn't know what it meant and then didn't ask for clarification. So how can you say it was non-substantive, Darth Dawkins? This is childish. You're tired. You need a nap and a shower and maybe an increase in your blood pressure medication. Seek professional help.
Okay?
Yes.
Now, you could have responded by saying, "Oh, it was substantive, and here's why." But you didn't do that, did you?
Well, I did ask you to elaborate on how I can make it substantive.
Go away.
Am I banished? Should I go?
No, I don't want to talk with you any further because you're dishonest.
Yes. Am I banished? Darth's answer is, no, I just don't want to talk to you anymore. Go away. Okay. That means he's banished.
Okay.
Don't tell me when I give you an intellectual objection, right, that my objection is worthless unless you're going to give me a formal rebuttal. You didn't.
He didn't say your objection was useless, Darth Dawkins. This is he's being super sensitive with this one. He said that I think he made a fair observation. It didn't seem like Darth Dawkins liked that answer, right? Like, I mean, if he'd liked it, if he was actually curious about it, shouldn't he have followed up with like some clarifying questions? He didn't even do that. He just sidestepped it. Now, that's not informative. Like, and then you said you didn't know what the word meant. You seem to know enough to say it was non-informative.
Now, listen to me. It's certainly okay.
Yeah, that's a good. This is a good point. Here comes the go away / come back so I can abuse you some more game. Yeah, he told him to go away. He's still talking about him and at him. This is
in certain instances to say, well, you just didn't like the answer. But you see, that wasn't the case. The issue wasn't that I didn't like it. Your answer was not substantive at all. Yes.
Well, I did.
Again, I ask, how did Darth Dawkins reach the conclusion that Dharma wasn't a substantive answer when he admitted that he didn't know what it meant?
I want you to elaborate on how I could make it substantive.
What fundamentally is the reason why anything at all exists? Fundamentally, since it's not God, what is the fundamental reason why anything exists?
It is truth itself, right? It is the.
Okay, go away. Go away. You're just another dumb atheist.
Oh.
If you want to eat healthy and feel your best, you gotta try Kachava. Kachava is the world's healthiest all-in.
Yeah, it's mud.
Your mom.
Yeah, see? There we go. See? There we go.
Oh, good for Flybus. He got that in there. Your mom.
And then he left.
And then people go, boy, Darth was so harsh with him. And then he exposed the fraud that he was. He was trolling the whole time. You know, and by the way, I spoke with Massimo Pilucci, who has 2 earned PhDs. I said, how is it that God doesn't exist?
Massimo Pilucci.
You know what he said? He said the same thing. He goes, I don't have a reason to believe in God. So I turned the tables on him.
He's, okay.
What's your reason to believe in the not God world? Guess what happened? He became angry and didn't want to talk with me any further because the atheist cliches don't work anymore.
So is the reason behind that, it's kind of like instead of allowing them to come up and just like attack your worldview, you force them to set up their defense on the other side?
If Zen Shapiro thinks that's what's going on, he's completely wrong. Zen Shapiro, you poor bastard. No, what Darth is doing is inserting his worldview into the non-believer's worldview, insisting that major aspects of his have to conform to the other person's worldview, and then when they don't, he accuses them of lying. So It's not even an argument. It's not a debate, and it's not an apologetic. He's not even defending the Christian faith at this point. It's just argumentative bullshit.
Were you here for the entire conversation?
The guy that just left?
Were you here for the entire conversation?
Yeah, I've been listening.
That's not an answer to my question.
Yes, I have been here. I've been listening.
You've been here the whole time?
Yes.
Okay, what was his opening statement to me?
That he had no reason to believe in God.
No. His opening
okay.
Statement is, let's debate.
Oh, yeah.
And then I said, okay, why are you an atheist? And then he goes, oh, well, I don't have a reason to believe in God. Well, that's not a rational justification that God doesn't exist. That's just simply a stipulation of his psychological state. Does it follow that somebody doesn't have a reason to believe in God?
I hope somebody holds him to this at this point now. So if that's true. But when he asks somebody, why are you an atheist? That can be confused as a question regarding your psychological disposition. What he has frequently demonstrated, though, is that he'll ask, why are you an atheist? And mean, why is it there is no God, or how come there is no God? So I hope now if he's being that particular with this guy and saying, I asked him, why is it that there is no God? And he just said he's not inclined to believe in one. He's giving me a defense of a psychological condition or whatever, which is not accurate, Darth Dawkins. I don't know why you keep saying that, but fine. Okay, be more clear about what you're asking then. And if someone's confused in giving a defense or describing their psychological disposition and say, okay, you're not inclined to believe that there's a God. Why do you think it is the case that there is no God? Maybe ask them that. Ask them a different way. Maybe try to suss a little bit more out of them instead of just trying to prove them wrong every single time they say everything.
That God doesn't exist? No, it doesn't follow. It's a non sequitur. Number two, the statement, I don't have a reason to believe in God, is equivalent to him saying, all of the facts that I am acquainted with do not necessitate referencing the necessity of God.
They don't, for reasons that I just brought up, right? So there's plenty of facts in the world that if you try to say that those necessitate the necessity of referencing God, that means every time you see a kid die of childhood leukemia, or see a kid go, suffer from river blindness, or watch see footage of a baby deer being slowly burned to death, trapped under a log in a forest fire, you have to reference God when you reference everything else too, right? If you see footage of the Holocaust, you have to reference that, a genocide in another country. If you see race riots and a race massacre in Oklahoma in the 30s in the United States, you have to reference God for those things too, man. It's not just mundane facts and good stuff. You have to reference all the bad stuff. And if somebody's seeing that and being told that God is a collection of properties that are all good and all powerful and all these beneficial things, that would make someone might make someone psychologically disinclined to believe that God is real.
Can he demonstrate that? No, he couldn't. So when somebody says, I don't have a reason to believe in God, it's because they don't actually have an intellectual defense of atheism. It's just a statement of their personal mental state. And as I continued to question him, he got more and more deceptive and sleazy and evasive. Okay, if I object intellectually to the content or substance of somebody's response that they give to me, and somebody responds as, well, you just didn't like the answer, that's sleazy in most instances. Look, I deal with a lot of sleazy and deceptive atheists. That's why I don't have any patience for them, because they're deceptive, they're deceitful.
Did you hook me up with your mom or something on a date?
You see, you just demonstrated you're a troll.
Yeah, he doesn't have anything to lose, Darth. You didn't give him any place else to go. So why shouldn't he do that? You're not going to engage in a conversation with him, but you will spend an additional 3 to 4 minutes bashing him, not giving him an opportunity to defend himself. So if he takes a cheap shot, can you blame him? Well, that's a problem. No one should ask Darth Dawkins if he's capable. People shouldn't take cheap shots.
Oh,
yes,
yeah, yeah. So you were never.
Darth can blame everything on anyone and everyone, but not himself. He's not to blame.
Serious to begin.
Oh yeah. I was serious, but oh no, I was serious. Yeah, I was serious, but Queen.
Bye, scumbag.
You know, he has to actually find out whether he was serious or not. This is pathetic.
I'll be back.
I like that guy. So he has to find out if he was actually serious or not serious. This is pathetic. Yes. Yeah, I think so too. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for that. This was a long one. Reviewed 2 of them. Yeah, so hopefully enjoy this one, folks. I'm going to bring in a few guests if they're willing to